All right. Today, we're going to talk about something that's kind of like the secret sauce of the legal system, the Maxims of Equity. Now, these aren't laws written in stone. Think of them more as the powerful guiding principles that have shaped what fairness even means in our courts. And they all started to answer one really critical question.
I mean, seriously, think about it. What do you do when following the rules word for word actually leads to a result that feels totally wrong? This is the exact problem that gave birth to the whole idea of equity. It's a huge question that legal systems have been wrestling with forever. So, way back in the day, the English legal system was all about what we call the common law. And, well, it was super rigid, very technical. It was all about the proper forms. If you didn't check the right box or use the exact magic words, you could lose your case, even if you were completely in the right. It just wasn't flexible. And that created a massive need for a different way of thinking, one based on fairness and what you actually meant to do. That's where equity comes in. So what was the fix? Well, a whole new system started to grow, handled by a top official in what became known as the Court of Chancery. And this place was basically a court of conscience. The whole point wasn't to throw out the old laws, but to step in when following those laws would lead to a really terrible, unjust outcome.
You know, the legal scholar F.W. Maitland just hit the nail on the head with this quote. Equity isn't fighting the law, it's its partner. It's there to fill in the cracks, to make sure the spirit of justice is served, especially when the literal words of the law just don't cut it.
Okay, so how does this court of conscience actually, make its decisions? It's guided by these things we call maxims. Now, this is really important. These are not strict, hardcore rules. It's much better to think of them as a moral compass, or maybe a collection of wise sayings that judges have built up over centuries to help point them towards a fair decision.
And here they are, the 12 core maxims. You can see right away, they don't read like stuffy legal code, do they? They sound more like big philosophical ideas, and they guide everything from how someone bringing a case should behave to how a judge should interpret a contract.
But look, a list is just a list, right? To really get a feel for how powerful these are, we can't just stare at the words. So let's zoom in and break down 3 of the most important ones to see how they actually deliver justice out in the real world.
Okay, this is where the rubber meets the road. We're about to see how these big, abstract-sounding principles have been used in real court cases to make sure people got a fair shake when they might have otherwise been out of luck.
All right, first up, equity acts in personam. All that fancy Latin means is that an equity court makes its orders against a person, targeting their conscience. It's not just about who owns a piece of land, it's about forcing an individual to do the right thing. It's personal. And this quote from Lord Selborne, it totally nails it. See, common law often worked in rem, which means against a thing. Its power was tied directly to a piece of property. But equity's power is in personam, against the person, and that gives it this incredible flexible power. It can order you to do something no matter where your stuff is.
And this brings us to this wild case from 1750, Penn versus Lord Baltimore. So you've got this fight over land borders in America. An English court shouldn't have any power over land in the colonies, right? But here's the kicker. Both guys were in England. So the court said, look, I can't command the land, but I can command you. And it ordered the defendant personally to stick to the contract. That's in personam in a nutshell. Pretty clever, huh?
Next up is a huge one. It's basically the bedrock promise of equity. Equity will not suffer a wrong to be without a remedy. This is so fundamental. It says that if your rights have been violated, the justice system can't just throw up its hands and say, sorry, there's no form for that. It has a duty to find a solution.
And the case of Ashby versus White is the perfect example. A guy was illegally stopped from voting. The other side argued, hey, what's the big deal? The candidate you wanted to vote for won anyway. No harm, no foul. But the court said, no, you're missing the point. His right to vote was violated. That in itself is the harm. That is the wrong that needs a remedy. So they awarded him compensation, proving that taking away a right is an injury, period.
And for our last deep dive, we've got a maxim that's all about playing fair. He who seeks equity must do equity. Put simply, it means you can't walk into a court of fairness and ask for help if you're not willing to be fair yourself. It's a two-way street. The court is going to look at you and ask, okay, but what are you willing to do to make this right?
This case just lays it all out perfectly. You've got employees who go on strike, the employer turns around and threatens to fire them, so the workers run to court asking for an injunction. That's a special equitable remedy to stop the threat. But the court basically said, hold on, you want us to force your employer to be fair to you, then you have to be willing to be fair back. Are you willing to end your strike? The workers said no. And the court said, well, then no injunction for you. They weren't willing to do equity, so they couldn't get it.
So after all that, what's the big picture? We've looked at these old cases and these old principles. Why do they still have such a huge impact on how our legal system works today?
All right, let's just boil it down. What should you remember? First, equity is the law's conscience. It's all about making sure the end result is just. It cares more about fairness and what people intended than about rigid rules. It makes sure that some small technicality doesn't stop justice from happening. And it reminds us that if you want fairness, you've got to be willing to give it. These aren't just dusty old ideas. They are alive and well, guiding judges every single day.
You know, when you really think about it, this whole story is a balancing act between two really powerful ideas. So I want to leave you with this question. When we're trying to build a just society, which is more important? Having predictable, strict rules that apply the same to everyone no matter what, or having the flexibility of a conscience that can bend those rules to get to a result that is truly fair? It's something we're thinking about.